Cyprus, the Counterintelligence podcast, hosted by IXN Solutions, the company you turn to for corporate counterintelligence expertise and creators of 351X.
And we're live. Joe Sheridan, good afternoon, my friend. How are you doing?
I am doing great. Excited about the next podcast. How are you, Jeremy?
Man, I'm really excited about this podcast. We're going to break from tradition about traditional CI legends and CI journeys. And we've got a guest on board who I've known for quite a while, from the active duty time all the way up into where he currently sits. When I think about modernization in the Army, I think about one person. And that one person is our guest, Mr. Andrew Evans, from fixed wing aviator all the way up to SCS, leading DAMI-ST. I'm really excited to get into our conversation. And Andrew, good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time, my friend.
Hey guys, it's awesome to be here, and especially with an intro where you say you're breaking from tradition. Because if anything we talk about is going to be traditional, I'm probably going to cut the podcast, right? Because I am not that. I am interested in moving fast and moving with purpose, and it's just an honor to be with you today.
Yeah, and I'll echo that, Andrew. I've seen you do it, having worked for you with the ISR task force, the passion for modernization, breaking barriers, and not breaking them, destroying them, so the warfighter are better equipped to turn, like what General Barrier used to say, red icons green, better, faster, stronger. And Andrew, I've seen you do it firsthand. I'm really excited to get into, your kind of journey from your time as an O-grade fixed wing pilot, which is unusual anyway, all the way up into where you are now.
Yeah, awesome. Well, again, thanks a lot, guys, for the time. And I want to make it clear that not every meeting that an SES has in the Pentagon is a fun meeting to have. And a lot of times you sort of look at your own calendar and you go, oh my gosh, I got to do that. But this is the opposite of that. I've seen this on the calendar now for a bit, and I've been looking forward to it because I think the discussion's important, and it's an area of passion for me and for those who work with me, because we believe it's just vitally important for the future success of our nation. So thanks a lot. Yeah, I mean, if you'd like, I'll walk you through kind of how I got here, and then we can go from there. I'm going to start at a place that most people wouldn't start, right? And I'm going to say that I'm a middle child, and you're going to go, what in the world does it have to do with anything that we're going to talk about today? And here's why. If you're a middle child, I don't know if either of you guys are middle children, but for those who are listening who are middle children, this will probably resonate with you. Middle children are usually the rebellious ones, and we're the nonconformists. In most cases, and we kind of grow up that way. We see our older siblings do things and we go, I'm not doing it that way. Or we see them try to break a rule and get caught, and then we go, well, I'm going to break it a different way so I don't get caught. And you kind of grow up in a world where you're always evaluating the environment around you, and trying to figure out, who you want to be in that environment, how you can find success in that environment as you watch those who have gone ahead of you. So grew up a middle child, but it also means that we're the type of people who don't always know what we want to do with our lives. Really. And so on my way to college after high school, I was just going to stay local. I was going to go to school in Tallahassee, Florida. Florida State University was my plan. My family's all from the Tallahassee area. But I had a buddy that was going to school in Greenville, South Carolina, at a very small private school. And he said, hey, you should come check this out. I'm doing this thing called ROTC. I said, what is ROTC? Like, what is it? Okay, sure. And I went on a campus tour, and I'm like, this is great. I got to go to this place. And so I ended up playing football my first year there and decided that wasn't going to be for me. My parents didn't have a whole lot of resources. And so I was really only going to be able to stay in school for a year. And I wasn't doing well in school, actually, because I thought I was going to be a pre-med student. I ended up kind of almost flunking out of biology. I tried another hard science with computer science, almost flunked out of that. And it wasn't going great, and we had no money to continue year number 2, but I was thriving in ROTC, and I had found my tribe with the communicators over in the communications department at the school. And so I kind of got deeply involved in mass media and marketing and how we move products, in the world, how we sell them. And I found my passion there, and I started to grow in this ROTC career and Army career, and eventually ended up in the Army. But like my journey started, I'm not going to be the guy that sits on your podcast and says I signed up because I loved the country or because I just wanted to serve. I was in the Army initially because they paid for school, and that was the only way I was going to be able to get through that private school. But I eventually, sort of really started to embrace it, but it took a while. I came out of college, As middle children often do, again, sort of unguided, I said, man, it'd really be cool to be an aviator. Let me see if I can do that. Somehow I got into that. Somehow finished fairly high in flight school and had an opportunity to fly airplanes. I thought my entire career was going to be flying generals around. And I was sorely disappointed when my first assignment was right in the heart of Iraq, out of Balad, Iraq, flying a bunch of computers in the back of an airplane that were doing intel things. Who knew, right? That the Army, the preponderance of Army airplanes were actually for intelligence purposes. And so I spent the first 5 or 6 years of my career in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan, and then I was done. Like many people in the early 2000s, I said, that's enough. Enough's enough. I finished my commitment. And I wanted to just leave, frankly. And I had a boss at the time who said, there's this really cool assignment that requires really cool people that are willing to do really cool things for America. And it's, up in the DC area. We'd like you to consider doing it. And I said, okay, I guess I'll try one more assignment. And I landed there in the DC area and ended up in the what was formerly the Foreign Counterintelligence Activity. It's changed names a couple of times, but doing truly really cool things on behalf of this nation, on behalf of our Army, that were really ultimately about protecting our equities, protecting our soldiers and our resources and our investments. And I learned that all the things that we were doing in Iraq and Afghanistan really would be for naught, because if we weren't careful about how we protected that stuff and the way that we were doing operations and business. And I learned a tremendous deal at that time about what it meant to really be a CI professional. It's where I first met, some of the folks that have worked with and for you two gentlemen along the way, and developed a newfound respect for what it is we do and why it matters strategically. And so, frankly, that assignment there in the DC area kept me in the Army and kept me focused on something much bigger than myself. It was no longer about my own happiness, my own fulfillment, sort of in, whether or not the Army seemed exciting to me. It was now about, oh my gosh, if we don't take it to the adversary on a daily basis, the only other option is they're going to take it to us on a daily basis. And so it's where I first started to really embrace the idea that we have to be offensive in the way we do things. We can't be defensive if we want to have any hope of success in the future. And so I learned a great deal in that assignment, went on to finish out my career, eventually in the Pentagon, managing the overall Army intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance fleet. And then did what middle children did and said, I guess it's time to go do something else with my life, and decided to retire. And then found myself right back in the G2, working as the director of the Army's ISR task force, which I'll be excited to talk about, kind of the journey there. But that's a bit of how I got to where I am. I would describe it as a journey of some luck and timing, and really a journey of meeting a lot of really good people along the way, being willing to listen to them and just sort of say, okay, what do you know? And how can I know what you know? Because I'd like to be better at this. And asking curious questions along the way, which I think is a key part of really developing personally. And then having those great opportunities to see things that are much bigger than myself, or even bigger than sort of what the traditional Army might do on the more strategic side, which kept me focused on the passion of protecting this country and making sure that we're taking it to the adversary every day. So that is how I got here, in a little bit more than 11-second elevator pitch. When I arrived and as a civilian and took the job as the director of the ISR task force, we had a stated mission, of course, and some objectives. And I try to boil it down by simply saying that it was about developing requirements and technologies that took it to the adversary every day on behalf of Army intelligence. And that was sort of full spectrum technological development, experimentation, and acceleration of those capabilities. Everything from the strategic CI work that's so important, down to the tactical sensing work that our soldiers rely on a daily basis for situational awareness. And for several years, a couple of years, I led that effort. And then, as is the case for all task force structures, they're very temporary by design. They're meant to solve problems and then stand down. And we knew that. And I was more than willing to help get it stood down and move on in my career. But our boss at the time, who I believe will be a future guest with you, a great man and a great warrior, and a great patriot of this country, General Tony Hale, said the work of transformation is so vitally important that it can't be a one and done thing. We've got to institutionalize this, and we've got to make it a permanent part of our DNA. And so we did. And so this year we established the Directorate for Strategy and Transformation. Somehow this middle child still has an opportunity to lead that, and we're still having fun doing it. And so we took the important work of the ISR task force, institutionalized it on the transformation side, and added to it the structure that comes with strategy and how you create, the right strategic outcomes for the enterprise. And so it's just an absolute honor to lead that. I feel like I have imposter syndrome every day. I literally wake up and go, how in the world am I here? And I think the answer is just because I got a great team of people and a great network of people who help make this look pretty easy. So, it's a privilege to do that. Here we are now in about 60 operating days of this new DAMI-ST. We did formally stand up in September, but then all of us got a 43-day unexpected, departure from the office there in October and the first part of November, and then we kind of rolled into the holidays. And so we are very much in our initial operating mode here. We kind of have our sea legs, and we're trying to figure out what this is going to look like going forward. But some things that will remain true, no matter what we look like on our final design, is that we will be hyper focused on delivering capability to soldiers at the point of need. Capability they need, not capability that they put into a connex, not capability that comes with more promises than actual progress, but real capability that delivers real, and necessary things to soldiers so that they can be better, more lethal, and more effective on behalf of this nation. So, yeah, it's been an awesome journey so far.
Andrew, you talked about standing up the task force, and you mentioned the fact that task forces are usually established to solve problems. It's been in the news. So with the new administration, they've got a lot of kind of critical eyes looking at the acquisition process, and I would say that the ISR task force was kind of doing that before it was in vogue. So if you don't mind, could you talk about kind of the former state of what you saw coming into that position, some of the problems that you identified, and some of the work that you've done over the last couple of years in order to improve that process?
Yeah, so I mean, I get really passionate about this because it's if you're really truly interested in maintaining advantage, then you have to also be really truly interested in breaking down barriers that prevent you from doing that. And so this administration and the entirety of the Secretary of War, and now by extension the departments, have pivoted, I think, in very important ways to start to look at all of those areas that might have been preventing us from achieving our own success. Like, what are these own self-imposed barriers? And so in the world of acquisition, a lot of it came down to what I would call as risk appetite. There was maybe an unwillingness to take the risk that was necessary because a lot of our folks were being measured on things like how a system would perform rather than whether it was even delivered or not. Did it perform in its test or did it not? Where can you take risk? And so we had a lot of people that were likely unwilling to deliver capability because it seems that when it got there, the soldiers might have some issues with it. Instead of saying, you know what, we're going to get things forward. There will be issues when we get these things forward, and we will resolve them based on soldier feedback, which is now sort of the way we're doing things under the significant backing from our chief and secretary that say it's going to be about soldier design first and foremost, and then we'll make improvements as we go, and speed will trump all else. And so on the acquisition side, we sort of pivoted in terms of starting to look at things that way, but also there's an accountability piece here that was, I don't know if it was missing, but it was disorganized. And so what you had in the past is that you had an organization responsible for requirements. So sort of the user representation, they would write requirements, and then when the requirement was finalized, they would ship the requirement off to a program executive office who would then build against that requirement. And then the money itself was being programmed, out of, the Pentagon, out of the G8, and so you had different people that were all, seeing the problem from different perspectives. And what would happen is when there was a challenge in the delivery of a capability, all of those people would, they're all great Americans, would all end up pointing the finger saying, well, it really wasn't me, it was the requirement. The requirements team would say it really wasn't the requirement, it was the material developer who didn't build to what I said they needed to build. And then the loser in that scenario was always the same, and it was always the U.S. Army soldier. And so it became, over time, sort of the self-fulfilling problem where we were all blaming each other, and everyone intended to do the right thing and was trying to do the right thing, but because nobody was really accountable, like somebody was accountable for this piece and somebody for this piece, but there was really no synchronization of a single point of accountability. What you see now, and what you're going to start to see come out, it's starting to codify in law, and we're starting to lean into this, is these, I'll call them single points of accountability, which are program, executives, program acquisition executives or portfolio acquisition executives, PAEs, that will have accountability for every piece of that pie. So instead of somebody blaming somebody else, it's literally inside the same organization, and they're empowered to make some trades inside their portfolios, which is what will allow us to go faster. So if that PAE determines that, hey, we're moving a little too slow here, and it's a result of a requirement that is not quite modulated right, then they can adjust that, right? Or hey, there's a requirement that says I need this or this range of things. I was trying to get to the high end, but I can only really afford the low end if I want to stay on schedule. They can make some of those decisions to keep material on schedule. And so what I think we fixed, and time will tell, is we fixed the accountability piece as well with the way we do acquisitions. Now, this is all brand new, Joe, to the entire Army in terms of how this will roll out. There's a lot of learning to be done still. I think that we will have some missteps along the way, and then we will do what good armies with the United States Army does anyway, which is we will learn, we will adapt, and then we will move forward on that. And so even though I have probably at times been maybe more of a pessimist about the way that our historically we had operated, I think there's a lot of promise in this new design. I really do. But it will require people that lean in to risk, and it will require people who say, look, we don't quite have all the right answers, perhaps, but we have enough of the right answers to move. And to me, moving in any direction is better than the status quo. Because again, like sort of the theme of what I want to talk about today is the status quo is going to get us killed, right? So we've got to take a step. And if we're taking a step, we're now an army in motion. And if we're in motion, we can pivot a lot easier. So I'm pretty excited about the new authorities flowing down, how I think this will affect acquisitions. I appreciate the compliment about how we were kind of doing this before anyone. I don't think we were. There's probably lots of pockets of excellence out there. We just happen to be folks that would lean into it a little bit before the bigger organization of the U.S. Army really said, hey, we've all got to do this. And so it's pretty exciting to watch this happen.
Andrew, I'm really glad, and thank you, as being a soldier who retired from the Army. Thank you for leaning forward and being aggressive. I recall my days in the good old 82nd Airborne where an acquisition was getting a new pair of boots. It wasn't capability that we put on our kit. So for the soldiers out there, Andrew, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for pushing the process, being aggressive, willing to take risk, and realizing sometimes good enough is get after it and making sure the adversary out there doesn't win, especially during this critical time as we transition from counterterrorism, which we're not anymore, back to great power competition. We're fighting a real frontal enemy. And, you know, like you've kind of said several times when we engaged when I was with the task force, we've got to be able to fly higher. We've got to be able to see deeper. We've got to be able to get that information through the PED process that much quicker so the soldiers on the ground can action it much quicker, because great power competition is much harder to fight than Mohammed the terrorist running around the desert.
Yeah, I agree. And then, sometimes things become, personal for people. And for me, I have a 19-year-old son. And if we don't get this right, then America will end up in an engagement we don't want to be in. And our sons and daughters will be engaged in bloodshed that they don't deserve to be in. Right. And so I think so. It's personal for me. It's personal because I share your same lineage. I too retired from the Army, but also now have kids that could one day be called to serve. And of course, it's an honor to serve. But we owe it. We owe it to the next generation. And part of the challenge has been that sometimes it's easy for those who are involved in acquisitions to forget that the outcome of their work is not actually about successful tests or a successful test report. It's like whether or not a soldier survived that day. And we forget that sometimes, and we start to make it personal, like whether or not your son or your daughter survived that day, all of a sudden it takes on a bit of a different meaning. So for me, for my boss, all of the bosses that I've had have been fantastic, with, starting with General Barrier, into Laura Potter, then General Tony Hale, and now General Michelle Schmidt. what fantastic examples of people who understand that, right? Who understand that this is the outcomes aren't about, more money in the budget or more, better test report. It's literally, do more of our soldiers come home that day than would have come home otherwise without our help. So we've all got to lean into that.
I'm going to cheat and ask two quick questions, Andrew. You mentioned about the status quo just not being acceptable, but the Army has never been known as an organization that really embraced change. And so, my first question is, as you are trying to make monumental changes to one of the most bureaucratic and kind of layered systems that supports the military writ large, what are those challenges you're still facing, and what are some of the things that are being done about that? But then the other thing I want to hit on is something that you said about, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes ago, and it talked about having to accept risk in order to get kit faster to the field and to the soldier. And again, the Army loves to talk about accepting risk, right up until they see it actually show up in the form of a problem. And so, how are you creating an environment where there is a risk tolerance and a willingness to accept a 90% solution?
I don't. I can talk about how I'm trying to work through it, and I will talk about that. But I will actually say that it kind of starts with having leaders that are willing to create and foster environments where it's okay to take risk. And so that is actually part of the challenge we have. And I think that's the tide is changing. So I will say that with our leadership, the tide is certainly changing. We're starting to see some very positive movement in this regard. But I read something recently, and I can't remember what book it came out of. So this is not an original quote, but the quote out of the book said that the Army tends to treat its innovators like heretics, right? So we say that we want to innovate, but then we sort of want to burn them at the stake, right? Because they do sometimes crazy things, or they try to push us in crazy directions. There's a quote, certainly a quote on my wall from Steve Jobs talking about the crazy ones are the ones who will change the world. And so that's the paradigm shift that's happening, is that we got to recognize that although the United States Army is a storied organization of legacy, of tradition, of methodology, of strict training and standards, sometimes those very things are the very things that anchor you, to a past that prevents you from being successful in the future. So while I believe in tradition and methodology, and I believe in standards to be certain, especially as a former aviator, standards keep you alive. Sometimes we impose our own obstacles. And so, what am I doing personally in that environment, which is still changing, which means it's still an environment where there is still some resistance to that change. The first thing is I always try to encourage people to understand the environment that they're in. And what I mean by that is we've got a lot of people still who have their head literally in the sand. I guess I should say figuratively in the sand. If it was literally in the sand, I guess they probably wouldn't be around too long. But figuratively, their head is in the sand, and they refuse to sort of pop out of that hole and look around and realize that we're at war every day. And you two gentlemen and the company you lead, you know it better than anybody, that people say, well, one day we might have a war, or one day we're at war every day. The adversary is
Hey, Andrew, can you pause
they're
real
trying
quick?
to infiltrate our supply chains. They're highly interested.
I think we're getting some latency issues, brother. You were coming in all gargled, at least on my end. Joe, was that? Yeah. I think that whole piece of the conversation, the answer, it started to get poor rather quick. Do we still have you, brother? Yeah, did we lose him, Joe? Yeah.
He looks like he's frozen. Maybe he's
Yeah.
switched audio.
Latency
I'm back.
issues. Oh,
There
okay,
he
there
is.
we go. Good deal.
Are you guys still with me?
Yeah, we're still with you. Andrew, really it started to go pretty poor after Joe asked the question. Joe, if you want to repose the question, I can edit this part out to pick it up right where you start talking again, Andrew.
Okay.
Do you remember the question, or did you want me to ask it again?
No, I remember it again.
Okay.
So Joe, thanks for that question. It is an environment that is still changing, and so I think what you can say in an environment that's changing is there's still some vestiges of the past that have not yet changed. And so, there are a couple conditions that have to exist in order to affect positive change. The first is you have to have leaders that embrace that change, and they have to have leaders that give folks autonomy to really create positive momentum for change in their organizations or in a group of organizations that come together, in certain formations. And so what we have, I think now is leaders who are like, look, we're all about change. Not only are we saying it, it's not just a buzzword. We expect change. They acknowledge that change is uncomfortable, which really it really sets the conditions to try to change. Now, when you're trying to change and you're trying to change an organization or the culture of an organization that is 250 years old, means it comes with a whole lot of tradition, right? A whole lot of legacy, a whole lot of standards, a whole lot of things that have made it strong for 250 years. But also a whole lot of red tape that grows over 250-year life of an organization. And so I have some personal things that I try to do to try to affect change. The first is try to encourage everybody that I come across to recognize that the environment is different than it once was. I say that people routinely have their head in the sand because they'll pop out and they'll look around and they'll still operate like it's 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And that's simply not the world that we're in today. We are no longer waiting, for a war. We are in war every day. This is, you mentioned it, Jeremy. This is competition. It's a world that's sort of marked by competition in every domain. It's a world where adversaries are constantly attempting to exploit any advantage we may have, constantly trying to access and manipulate our supply chains, access and manipulate our people. Access and manipulate our secrets, and that's happening on a daily basis in all the domains, right? And so we've got to be hyper aware of that. We've got to recognize the environment we're in. It's no longer the environment of 10 years ago or 20 years ago where we might have thought we had more time. We just kind of running out of time. The second thing that I think you have to do in an environment that is changing quickly is you have to be honest in your ability to self-assess. So, when I say that, what I mean is, I think there's a few key questions. The first is, am I individually, am I personally, in whatever role I've been asked to fulfill, am I part of the solution for making the Army better? And then the counterpart to that question is, or am I the example of a person who is the reason the Army has to change? Like, am I going to be part of making it better, or is the Army changing because there's too many people like me who will not allow it to change? And so those two are in juxtaposition to each other. A lot of people fail to do that level of self-reflection, and they blame the system, and oh my gosh, it's moving too fast. And what they don't realize is it's moving because them potentially or people like them refuse to move, and so there's some self-assessments that have to come in there, and then the hardest question for people to sort of accurately and honestly assess about themselves is this: am I doing things in my role that matter to the priorities of the administration, that matter to the Department of War or to the Department of the Army? And let me give you just an example, and we could probably we could all tell stories all day long about how we see this play out. We are measuring performance sometimes in the incorrect ways, at least in my view. And so if somebody says to you, my job every year is to write this very robust report, and I'm supposed to write one report per quarter. And last year I had an exceptional year because I produced 6 reports. So, my output was significantly more than what I was supposed to perform. So I am, an all-star member of your team. But if that same person never asked the question of, did anyone ever read my report? Did it go anywhere? Did it matter to anybody? Did it affect any outcome? Then what are we doing, right? I mean, and I don't mean to minimize that. There is some important work that happens, but we don't spend enough time asking if the work that we're doing matters to anybody. And so as a result, we continuously, in some pockets of the organization, like do work that maybe people don't care about anymore. And so I think that's what our chief and our secretary and our leaders are focused on, is let's find those areas where the work is impactful and it's aligned to the priorities of the department. Let's double down on those. Let's accelerate in those areas. And where the work is misaligned, let's change. Let's upskill our folks. Let's get people trained so they can work on priority stuff. And let's stop doing things that are simply anchoring us to the status quo, especially stop doing things that the only person that cares about is the person producing the work, because maybe it doesn't matter downstream of them. Nobody else is looking at it. So, honest self-assessment, I think, is point number 2. And then finally, Joe, the question you asked was about a culture of risk, we got to lean into risk. And here's the problem. And nobody really likes working in organizations where there's a lot of friction. But if you're going to lean into risk, you're going to create some friction, right? And the friction is going to be most evident from people who are uncomfortable with how fast things might be moving and want to slow it down, or have no experience in that area and therefore say it's impossible to do. And so friction should be expected. We're never going to be able to avoid that. The idea is to manage it in the most effective and productive way for an organization. One thing I'll tell people is that without friction, there's no acceleration, and that kind of resonates, right? So if you think about trying to run on ice, you could run like really, really fast on ice and you'll go nowhere because there's no friction. But if you do have some friction, like on a track, your feet might get hotter because of that friction, but you're going to move somewhere as a result. So friction is a necessary part of moving forward. We have to do that. And then uh, we've got to understand our roles, each of our roles in the ecosystem. And so some of what will make us successful is the way we manage talent around this. And that sounds boring unless you can sort of resonate with this. And that is the people who are most willing to lean into risk, who are most honest about whether or not the work that we're doing is a priority, who are most aware of the hyper connected environment that we're in and the difficulty that we are having of keeping pace with adversaries, who in some cases are probably outpacing us. Those people end up being your best visionaries for where we need to go. And so we got to get them promoted, right? We got to put them in positions where, that their big ideas or at least have a platform to be discussed. And then they have to be surrounded by people who can help bring that to life, right? There is standards that apply. There is methodology that matters. There is compliance that matters. We can't be willy-nilly in the way we do this, but we also can't make process itself our objective. The progress of the Department of Defense has to be our objective, and it has to be layered with the appropriate process to make it legal, moral, ethical, and all the things that are most important. So that's a lot of words to say that our biggest threat will be the threat of staying in the status quo and taking no action. Because I'll tell you who's not in the status quo. China, they're not staying in the status quo. Russia, not. North Korea, not. Iran. I mean, look at just what happened this weekend with Venezuela, and then the protest happening in Iran, and you can see the continuous rattle sabering in North Korea. Our adversaries are on a mission. And that mission, in many ways, is counter to our Western ideals and counter to our way of life. And if we are not also on that mission, then that means we are in the status quo, and we're going to find ourselves very, very far behind and potentially at great risk in the future. So we've got to move with a sense of urgency. So none of it's easy, Joe. I mean, you know this as a leader. None of change and managing change isn't easy. The culture of change is very difficult to do, but getting that buy-in and moving and getting people moving, got to just take that first step.
Andrew, you said several things, and I just want to highlight a couple ones, then ask a question, right? So the first one being is gain the advantage by any means. Our adversaries do it consistently and constantly. So breaking that silo of process and making progress greater than process. And again, Andrew, you and your team are doing that, and I applaud that, because the soldiers out there are the ones everybody works for. The individuals on the ground with the muddy boots, breaking those silos, and status quo is not an option anymore. And I think it's funny to me, not funny, but the Department of Defense changed its name to the Department of War. A simple name change to me is something that can be significant when it talks about breaking silos, which you've mentioned several different times. So as silos are being broken and what's old is now new again, I'd like to pick your brain on Army Futures Command, them folding up the flag and transitioning back under TRADOC, and what that means for you at DAMI-ST.
Yeah, I mean, so to be technically correct, what happened is the Army merged a couple of four-star commands into a single command now called T2COM, which is Training and Transformation Command. So it was the merger of TRADOC and AFC. And so what we now have is a significant command with significant responsibility for recruiting and training and requirements definitization and all the Title 10 aspects, like how do we man, train, and equip our formations to go and fight wars. And so what an awesome opportunity the Army has with T2COM. We learned some incredible things, I think, with AFC. I was never in AFC, just partnered with them. We learned a lot of really important things about where requirements go right, where requirements go wrong. how we better integrate with commands, how we better deliver capabilities. I think all of those lessons have been ported into T2Com now, and there's some incredibly thoughtful and intelligent leaders in that formation that are trying to get us in the right direction. So I remain optimistic that T2Com will continuously improve the Army's posture, as we move forward. Now, I think your question, if I was a betting man, would say that you're probably hinting at, there may have been some times that within the process that we established under AFC, that we were slower than we thought we should be. And I think that comes down to the risk that we talked about before and the accountability that we talked about before, which is why you saw the collapse of commands and you see the stand up of portfolio acquisition executives, is to try to get accountability to the right place, because things will really bog down if nobody knows who's in charge. Then it's really easy to slow down because everyone blames everybody. Now it's, I think, fairly clear who's in charge of things in the world of transformation with T2Com, fairly clear of who's in charge of material development. So I think we're going to move in the right direction there with T2Com, the PAEs, the authorities coming out of the Army Secretariat, and some other things. I don't know if that gets specifically after what you want to talk about with AFC. I do remain optimistic that in this new design, we will be able to accelerate some needed capabilities. We'll be able to make the trades we need to get equipment to the field. But I also, look, I'm a realist. It is really important that we have the right design. I think we have the design now. But designs are nothing. Organizations don't mean anything. Outcomes mean everything for the U.S. Army soldier. And so let's see what kind of outcomes we produce in this new design. That will be the measure of whether our decisions here this year to reorganize were or were not the right ones.
Andrew, I was hearing both you and Jeremy talk about stovepiping, and I don't want to get into a conversation on Goldwater Nichols, but at the Army level, as you are trying to move quick to get the right kit for intel professionals, are you seeing any increase in kind of joint coordination to ensure that part of the solution to the stovepiping is getting people on the same systems? And if so, how is that being choreographed?
Yeah, the challenge in some of the meetings that I sit in, and probably many leaders in the Army and other services, is that we all tend to operate and act as if we are kind of rolling alone. So we're an Army, by God, and we're the land force, or we're an Air Force, and by God, we own the air. But the reality is we're all just contributors to the joint force, right? This is a joint problem, which means that, and let me add to that. It's a joint problem and it's a multinational problem. In this world in which we live, it won't just be a future joint fight. It will be a joint fight when combined with other nations, to bring it to an adversary in a combined way. And so, so your question's a really important one, because we fall short oftentimes of figuring out from the very beginning how to interoperate, with our other partners, and how to ensure that the capabilities that we're building aren't just capabilities that only the Army can use, but are capabilities that can talk to and interact with and feed information to networks and systems that other services operate. So there's been a big push of late in the last number of years for combined joint, command and control. All domain command and control, CJAD-C2, I think it was called. It's probably changed names a couple of times, but the idea is that every joint sensor, every joint system ought to be able to contribute to the collective benefit of all the joint partners. And so, are we there yet? No, we're not there yet. Do we have people working on it? Yes. It's very complex. So add to the complication of organizational change and culture, the culture pivoting, add to that other people's organizations and cultures, like the other services changing and pivoting. And now you've got a lot of complexity that you got to work through. And so I'm optimistic that we'll get there in certain areas. It'll probably be a little bit, we'll be a little bit further ahead in some areas, a little further behind in some areas. And then what I'm hopeful for, though, is that we don't lose too much of our capabilities to theft or supply chain disruption or something in the short term while we wait to figure out how to interoperate. So, I always kind of watch that. I'm not a guy that says, all these things keep me up at night, but what does keep me up at night is this thought that maybe we would be in a situation where not a single shot needs to be fired for America to be potentially overtaken. If you think about what that means, either somehow economically or from a cyber perspective. And so That does alarm me a little bit. And so I think this, working together with joint partners across, and then for us broadly across the intelligence community remains paramount to what we do.
Hey, Andrew. So we're a couple weeks already in by the time we publish this into 2026. As you're looking at 2026 and beyond, what are some of the focus areas you want to try to make impact for the Army and the soldiers on the ground?
I learned, Jeremy, a good question, and I'll answer first by saying what I've learned doesn't work, and that's why what I say after that might make more sense. So what I've learned doesn't work is coming in and thinking that you're going to solve every problem. We hear people describe that as boiling the ocean. It just doesn't do anything, right? If you try to tackle everything, you do nothing very well. And there's an enormous number of problems that we could potentially tackle. So the idea is you got to find the ones that make the most sense for where you are in time and space, the ones that you have the most ability to affect, and the ones that'll have the most outsized returns. And so, I probably break that up into a couple different portfolios. Since you guys lead an outstanding, company here focused on the things that you focus on the CI side, I'll just start with that. It's some of the capabilities there that I think we've got to look for are how do we better see ourselves from a data perspective? I think we've got some databases where all of our details about different investigations we have going on or something are stored, and how do we modernize all that stuff? How do we use AI in better ways so that we are our agents and investigators aren't spending countless hours trying to sort through old manual data and potentially missing something really important, which is the thing that would keep me up, is that just our data is so unstructured that something is right in front of us, but we simply can't see it, right? And so in the world of CI, the kit and capabilities necessary to ensure that we are always staying ahead of our adversaries is something that we're working on. In the world of more broadly at the war fighting at the tactical edge, it's how do we employ AI in ways that make the most sense and deliver the most effect. And so things that are always on our mind are more rapidly identifying, characterizing, and then making sense of potential targets. So automatic target recognition, how to use AI to do that. And so that's something that we're going to be working on. We're going to double down on the world of I'm going to call it digital ISR. But some other people would call it open source intelligence, or potentially the way you use publicly or commercially available information to really begin to refine what other higher end ISR can help fix for you later on. And so, if you go in the Wayback Machine, the U.S. Army spends hundreds of millions of dollars a year on airborne assets and ground sensing and some other things to try to develop a sense of what the enemy might be doing, what the adversary might be doing. But it turns out that in a world that's digitally connected, you can probably figure out all the same things, most of the same things, if you just had access to, commercial telemetry data and some other things. And there's some policy things we've got to work through in that regard. We always have to do that in a way that represents, our rights and protects American citizens. So, on the right side of the law on this, we've got to figure out a way to exploit that in more meaningful ways. So, operationalizing OSET, maybe that's a word, to make it sort of the lead intel sensor, if you will, that you would use other intel sensors then to refine and begin to build much more significant pattern of life and better understanding what the adversary is doing. So that's, some of the things we're working on there. There's a lot of, I recognize that we're on this line, so I won't talk about a lot of the high-end signal intelligence capabilities or potentially some other more classified capabilities, which would all sort of wrap around this counter UAS problem that the Army has. But my boss recently described the UAS and the proliferation, tough word to say, the proliferation of small UAS as this generation's IED. And so there's a couple of guys, 3 guys on this call who grew up in the IED era. We know just how devastating that can be and just how many resources were poured into ensuring our soldiers were safe. And so UAS is the new IED in her view. I agree with that wholeheartedly. So that means as intel professionals, like, what is our role? Like, how do we help? How do we help? And that help might look differently. Again, as somebody who tries to think outside the box, I don't know that it's just a pointy end of shooting down a UAS or disrupting its link. It could be like, how do how do we get into supply chains early and these kind of things? How do you understand where these components are coming from? How do you manipulate that economically? There's a million ways you could think about that problem. But it's the hard thinking that I think we have to do. So we're going to not boil the ocean. I just gave you a lot of things. Your listeners are going to say, oh, well, you said you were going to have only a few things and you gave me a lot. But I think if I was to summarize, it would be digital ISR on the operationalizing OSINT. It would be, really, for the purpose of your viewers, it'd be really hyper accelerating CI capability so that we aren't just losing all our advantage the day it's delivered because it's been stolen. And then it would be, AI to the warfighter at the edge. And then the fourth would be, what does it mean to be directly involved in how we counter the UAS problem, and how does Intel help contribute to that? So those four things I think are going to be key focus areas. Of course, my boss gets a big vote on that about where she wants to put our time and resources, and we're going to give her some time to think through where she wants that to go as she does battlefield circulation here, and that will be refined as a result, and then eventually published to the community so that everyone knows what the G2 is interested in and how they can help work with us on that.
Andrew, as a CI guy, you talking about the concerns of new kit being basically already compromised the second it gets delivered to the warfighter is something that's very near and dear to my heart. And we've had a couple of podcasts bringing in some of the graybeards within the community and talking about how one of the areas that acquisition fails is never having any kind of funding that's allocated for protecting the development of said technology so that it is effective and still has that resilience when it gets employed on the battlefield. Have you seen anything that recognizes this gap in kind of the current process? And do you have any suggestions on how companies could incorporate that into their costs without it being the thing that gets them turned down because they're too expensive?
So we're seeing the conversation start to take form, and it's a little bit unfortunate that it's taking this long, to happen, right? Because you guys know, you spent your whole career seeing this over and over again, but sometimes it takes some significant leaks or insider threats or whatever to really be exposed to realize just how big of a problem this is. But our leaders, I think they do understand it. My hope is that we aren't going to wait until we have, some compromise of the next space shuttle before we realize that people are stealing stuff. And so, with regards to what companies can do, my proposal would be that all companies need to figure out very early in the process how they monitor and evaluate their employees. Like the Army does, I think, a pretty good job at doing that. We're now on continuous vetting. But the Army is maybe not the only. Unfortunately, every service would have leaks. Unfortunately, there's always going to be an insider threat challenge that you got to contend with. But the insider threat challenge is real in industry as well. In industry, now here soon, according to President Trump last night, he wants a $1.5 trillion defense budget. Most of that money flows to industry because industry is what builds that is the defense industrial base. And so if our industry partners don't have robust insider threat programs or the ability to see kind of what their employees are doing or where they might have some areas of risk like we monitor in the Army, boy, then that's an example of companies that could be employing engineers or accountants or any type of specialty that could be turning around, and that information could be flowing straight to an adversary. Right. And so you can find leaks all over the place. So my encouragement to these companies is you got to double down on your CI investments, whatever that looks like, so that you don't find yourself in a situation where you worked really hard to build a capability for the Army that then we find out is exploited already. And then not only does the capability not get a chance to see the light of day, but then the company itself is sort of has a hard time surviving after that. So, it's a real threat. It's something companies should take seriously. And I am glad there are some people out there that are helping resolve that. And I hope, like for you guys, I think you're involved in that in some ways. I think people should take heed and listen to the experts on the inside that have been there for a while and know just how serious this could be if they don't resolve it.
Yeah, what keeps me up at night, to be honest, is when that soldier needs to employ a new piece of technology, whether it's a fighting system or it's a system that's going to save their life or the life of a fellow soldier. When they go ahead and try to employ it, it goes click and it doesn't work because the supply chain was manipulated. And in industry out there, Andrew, this executive order that Trump recently signed for this 1.5 trillion for the 2027 budget, wow, it's going to be a lot, but it comes with some stipulations, I believe. The defense industry base now needs to make sure that they're not going to pay the dividends or the buyback stock right now unless a product is delivered as promised within time and in budget, I really do think that's going to help the warfighter out there quite a bit. It's not going to be these big primes sucking up all this money and we're going to build you the best widget X. And now they're asking for more money. And now that they're asking for more time, and it never gets built like they said it would. I find that curious that a lot of that happens. But so my question would be this executive order that came out with that. How do you think that's going to impact big industry? And do you think it'll give small, innovative companies out there an opportunity to get into the acquisition process to the Department of War?
Yeah, I'll separate those into two questions because one is about incentive structure and one is about sort of how to compete. And so, first, I recognize that one day I will probably not be in the government and will probably work somewhere in industry. And maybe saying this will mean I'll never have an opportunity in industry, right? Because it'll sound anti-industry, and that's not really what I mean. I think it's just more pro-military and pro-good use of resources. So I fully support what the administration is saying. I fully support that. What they're really saying in that executive order is it's not enough we're not going to measure success at the defense contractor level by how much money you made, what your revenue was per quarter, right? Which then turns into stock price, which then turns into bonuses and compensation packages and so forth. What we're really going to recognize as a Department of Defense and as the United States of America is actual outcomes, like the delivery of things you said you were going to do. And so the reason this is, I think, a challenge for some of the bigger companies, and then we'll pivot to the small ones, is because they have sort of made a living over the last 30 years of getting really good at bidding on big contracts. So they hire really, really good teams of people that know how to write well to proposals. They know what the technical evaluation board wants to hear. They know what the source selection committee wants to hear. And they write really well to that. And they know because the DOW, and let's just say in this case, the Army kind of has bad behavior, it's repeated behavior. We keep changing our mind all the time. And so they know we're going to change our mind. So what happens is they might underbid a project, they win, and then the Army changes its mind 3,000 times along the way. And these change orders are just like cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching for the contractor. And so it's actually bad behavior on both sides. It's a contractor that says, yeah, I can do it for, making this up. I can do that thing for $10, but they really know when they bid, it's really going to be more like 50, but don't worry, the Army will change its mind and we'll get all our money back. And then it's the Army not sticking to what it said and then really not holding people accountable. So, I did talk earlier about how this new accountability model is going to help fix some of that stuff. I think that holding compensation at risk is a great way to do that. People, for better or worse, humans are motivated at times by their personal compensation, and so I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I didn't sleep at a Holiday Inn. I have no idea about the enforceability of such things against private companies. I think the enforceability comes down to whether or not they will be able to compete for contracts is probably where the enforceability comes. And so to that end, the second part of your question was about what does it mean for small business? And I've always been, as you know, I've always been very pro small business. If we have an opportunity to work with a small business, that's where we want to go as Intel people. And the reason is sort of there's multiple reasons, but the first is because a small business has to perform or else they're not a business anymore. And so one of the most enticing things to me about working with small businesses, if that that business development man or woman comes in and maybe a VP or a CEO comes in and they tell you, hey, I can get you this product in 4 months. If they don't get you that product, there's really no other product line for them to lean on. Like either the product delivers or the company's bankrupt, kind of thing. And so they have a personal vested interest in this to the degree that a lot of the bigger companies don't, because bigger companies offset loss. Sometimes, as you know, right, and any economist knows, sometimes the bigger companies' loss can be beneficial, right? As in terms of certain tax benefits and things like that. And so they kind of look at that as how do we structure our loss in a positive way for our balance sheet. And so these small companies, they can't afford to do that. So small companies are usually more eager to lean in. They're also closer to the problem, I would argue. And so, the best small companies out there are usually created by people who experienced the problem themselves and then said, by God, I'm going to fix that. Like if it takes me till the end of my life, I'm going to fix that problem. And they go out there and they start something and they say, I know it's a problem. I experienced it. It still hasn't been resolved. I'm going to help fix it. And so they have personal and close connection to the actual problem. versus some of the bigger companies that, there's people who work there that don't even have never even seen what the United States Army does. Right? They just happen to know they work on a missile that goes somewhere. So the small companies have a lot of opportunities now. I think in this new environment, there's a new. You guys had sent me a list of things to make sure that I capitalized on, and I want to make sure I do talk about like the Army Fuse program. It's a new initiative by the Secretary of the Army, where we've wrapped in small business innovation research and how we do cyber contracts. We've wrapped in, tech maturity initiatives, and we've taken all these disparate programs, combined them together, and given a pathway for these small companies to come in, prove their gear, and get very rapidly on contract that can get them to scale. And so, most people will tell you that the biggest challenge of working with a small company is actually their production capacity, which is it is a true challenge, especially if you're in the world of hardware weapons. And so, some of these new ways we're contracting can help us, overcome that valley of death, if you will, help them get to scale. There's also a focus right now on working with private equity, and asking private equity to lean in and help pull some companies along, help them get across that valley of death, helping incentivize, the companies for performance. And so, if I was a new entrant in a young company and I was eager to help solve a defense problem, I would think it'd be a pretty good environment to work in right now. But you still have to kind of know people, right? And so one of the things that we did in the ISR task force, that is going to be a key part of who we are, our DNA, and in this new directorate, is that we want to be accessible to people. We don't want to be the some voice out of the Pentagon that says things and no one knows how to talk to or communicate with or debate with, because that's important too. And so, I opened up my, like my LinkedIn, my email address, and all these other things years ago, and I've made so many contacts along the way from industry, and in most cases we say yes when they want to meet. We'll at least take an initial meeting, see what they have to offer, and in many cases the answer may be it's not helpful for us, but we give them advice about where to go or who to see or how to improve their product line. So. I will always avail our team to do that. I'll ask you guys if you're willing to put, whatever. I guess you can just use my LinkedIn, put it in there. Let your listeners can reach out, and I'll probably personally respond. And I may direct them to somebody on my team, but I always want to be approachable, because the further you get removed from the actual problem, the worse your decisions are when it comes to how to solve that problem. And I don't want to get too far removed from the problem. So, yeah, small businesses have a key part to play here. We love hearing from them, and try to help them the best we can.
Quick question on that. You mentioned it. Small businesses don't have the resources to have the 10-time award-winning writer putting together their proposals. And I know you've seen a lot of the pitches from some of the small intel companies that are out there, Andrew. Is there any guidance that you can give to our listeners that are leaders in small businesses on what you're looking for and some of the key errors that you're seeing keep people from being successful in those engagements?
Yeah, the first thing is that these small companies will come in and they a lot of sometimes it's because they don't know. And so I always try to give folks a benefit of the doubt. But the most common thing you hear from a small company is, hey, we've got this capability. Can we just we just need a contract with the government? And so it's sort of a lack of understanding about how government contracting works. And I wish I could change it. I wish I could sort of rewrite the laws. But business to business contracts are so much easier. You can just, Jeremy, as the CEO of a company, could say, you know what, that's a good partner. I believe in that partnership, and I'm just going to write a contract with them. And then there you go, you have a contract. And the government, it's different. There's a lot of laws that apply there. But we're starting to lean into other transaction authorities, so OTAs, which I'm going to probably do a pretty poor job of explaining. But in layman's terms, an OTA is a B2B contract, but the government has a G2B with one person, with one OTA, and then that OTA can contract with all kinds of business in B2B arrangements. And so that's super powerful. So we are just starting to explore that. We're going to this year leverage an OTA. I won't say it on this podcast. I don't want them to get crushed with things, but if people come see me, they'll be the hook for your listeners. If they come see me, I'll tell them which OTA we're going to partner up with. And then they can go work with that OTA to figure out how to get on board. And getting on board with an OTA is easy. right? It's just, hey, here's what we do, here's why we exist, and the next thing you know, you're a partner. And then if the government wants to work with you, there's a legal pathway to do that, and we don't have to go through all the, some of the red tape that's out there that makes it so slow. So that's the hook. If folks are interested, there are many OTAs out there, so it doesn't have to be just one. But the idea here is give people a chance to compete. Give them a chance. Like no small company can afford to just hire full-time writers that write proposals, and you shouldn't be in the volume game. You should be focused on your product. So if all your time pivots to writing proposals and then all your time disappears from your product, then like, what are we doing, right? So stay focused on the product and then work through OTAs to get the government business. And that will build past performance. Everybody wants to be a prime. That's, of course, it's kind of like the holy grail. Like, everybody wants a piece of it. But start where you can, right? Even if it's as a subcontractor, somebody, start there. Don't fight the process. Just embrace it, and then build that past performance. And then over time, it builds credibility. And then you start to get your name out there, and that's how you can go off to the races. A couple words of warning though for companies. Companies have to stay hyper competitive in this market. So I don't think that's really a problem for small business. They, of course, have to compete every day of their lives. For the big ones that still want to be in this business, I think gone are the days of these massive 10-year contracts and things. I think that our leadership is interested in making people compete every few years, just to make sure that you keep laser focused. You see a lot of emphasis on internal research and development investment, ensuring that the companies believe enough in their product to invest their own money, not just the government's money. So hyper competition matters. It's still important for me, and I tell companies this all the time, even though it's hard for them to do at times from a cash flow perspective. One of my favorite movies is Field of Dreams, and it's one of my favorite movies because Kevin Costner in that movie builds a baseball field, but he doesn't even know why, right? He's like, I don't know. I think I'm supposed to build this field. So, and then when he does, you know how the story plays out. And so I think that industry in some ways needs to think about their product development like Field of Dreams. Like, when you're onto something and it matters, just do it. Just do it. Because having something tangible and then presenting that like, hey, here's my thing. I built it. Who can use it? It's far easier for us to then sort of we don't have to conceptualize it anymore. We can just literally see it. And then it's like, wow, I need this thing. I'm going to deploy it. And that's how you get off and running. So, the Field of Dreams model matters. I've said very publicly many times, companies have to close the gap between their PowerPoint and their product. So we see so many business pitches, and it's, sometimes companies walk out and you're like, I'm not sure if any of that is real. Which is why the Field of Dreams concept matters. Like, the more you can build and show, the better, so that we can get out of the world of concept. And then this is going to be the most, counter SES comment that I probably make all day. Don't work on dumb things. Like, just don't work on dumb things. So if you're a company and you have things that are like dumb and they don't align, it's back to my comment about, am I doing things that really matter? Like, make sure you're building something that matters. Because if you're still building a capability that was like really relevant when we were, doing convoys, from Kuwait to Baghdad or something, like, then you're going to kind of get like the big eyes in the Pentagon, and people are going to go, wow, this company has still got their head in the sand. So don't build dumb things. Build things that matter. Build them, deliver them on time, close that gap between your PowerPoint and your product. Those are just some keys to success. And companies that do that will find their success in this environment.
Hey, Andrew, I know Jeremy has a question, but I was just going to say, if you want to give us the name of that OTA partner, I promise you, we'll tell everybody else that has a question about it. We'll pass the word for you.
Yeah, I probably will. Yeah.
That's too funny. That's actually was my question. No, Andrew, we are coming up on time, and I do want to be respectful of that. Looking back through your entire career, are there any words of wisdom or other recommendations you can provide our audience before we close it out?
I don't think you want wisdom from me, right? You just like my wisdom comes from a lot of trial and error, because I think I do. I certainly do represent somebody who is willing to push about every boundary there is. If somebody says there's a wall in front of you and that's an impossible wall to scale, I will figure out a way to scale it, go dig under it, go around it. I don't know, because I just sort of see those as opportunities. And so I think that just in broad terms, it's important that we continue to incentivize those people instead of treating them like they're heretics. To go back to my other statement, it's hard. It's hard in this environment that we're in. The culture of the Army is rooted in lots of tradition, and there's a lot of people that say, well, that's not the way we do it. My prediction as an intel officer, but this is not an intel prediction, it's sort of a prediction, is that for all the people out there who say that's not the way we do it, there'll be far fewer of those people here in 5 years, because the not how we do it people are going to find that they don't have, relevant work to do, and therefore maybe not a job as we move forward. So you got to be a person that leans in, that says, well, that's not the way we have done it, but I can see the value. Let's roll. You got to see obstacles as opportunities, and then ultimately it all kind of comes back to risk. Risk is also a team sport. And so a lot of people say, yeah, I'm willing to accept risk. And what they really mean is, I'm cool if I work in an organization where somebody to my left or my right is a risk taker. I just want to watch them and maybe benefit. I don't think those people will thrive in this environment. I think that everyone's got to be willing to say, this is a challenge that we face. The opportunities, even if it looks like a unscalable wall, and the risk I'm willing to take to try to prove that if we get through that, it's a better future for us all. So, be yes people, figure out ways to get to yes. You can't, I'm not advocating that we're loose or illegal by any means or unethical. There are certain standards that make me proud to be an American, and that's that we always do things in a way that is honoring to our tradition, and in a way that's honoring to our values, right? And so, I would never advocate that we do things outside of that or outside of the law, but there's lots of ways to use the current law, current policies to get to yes, instead of to just use them to find a way to say no. So be yes people. That'll help us solve problems. And then our commitment is to be good partners on this side to help pull you through and show you what a path of success looks like.
Andrew, I love it. Thank you. And I still remember to this day a quote that you said when we worked together. It was, no is the start point of a negotiation. And I use that probably pretty consistently through my days right now, Andrew.
Yeah, there's no, I don't like the word no at all, because no is uncreative, no is lazy, no is easy. And there's a lot of people that love to say no. And if I didn't already say it, you can't let people who have no authority to say yes be the people that say no. And that's a passion area for me, because so many people want to take the path of no, but if you press them, well, why not? They don't really have an answer other than, well, we've never done it. Well, that's okay. That we never went to the moon until we went to the moon, and so if you want to do big, bold things, you got to be willing to say, yeah, we've never done it. So let's try it. And we got to take some risk in the ways that we do that. So anyway, I don't think any of that's wisdom. I think it's just some of it's just common sense. And what I do want to reiterate is there are people inside the government who are working hard on this. There's probably some people out there who think that the government's full of just process people who just want to, stamp something on the top of a piece of paper and slide it to the next desk so they can stamp something over the top of that. I don't know that that's entirely true. The government is full of really hardworking, passionate people who share my same commitment to the future of our nation, who also, in many cases, have served or have children that serve. It's a great career to be in. We need people who are bold thinkers that take up a mantle of service to lead this nation. And it's a total honor to be, counted among them. So, thanks again for letting me tell part of my story and just being with you guys today.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you again for taking the time. I want to go back to how you kicked this off. Is you kicked it off about being the middle child, and as we were talking, I was trying to, put this in perspective a little bit. The middle child, right? Mature enough to be defendable, flexible enough to adapt, and aggressive enough to affect change. It's really instilled in the Army aviation motto of above the rest, Andrew. And when I think about individuals like that, I think about you. The culture of risk that you've created, the aggressiveness to affect true change. It's about the soldier, and you've said it several times, and it is about the soldier. Everything that you and your team are doing is to make sure the soldiers out there are protected and they have the right tools and equipment to go ahead and decisively win against our adversaries, because our adversaries are not stopping. They are aggressive and they're using every means out there, and you are countering that by arming our soldiers out there. And I applaud that. And thank you so much for your team and taking the time to talk with us about Army modernization this afternoon.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks a lot. I'll pass that on to our team. I think they'll consider that a great compliment. They all work really hard to defend this nation, and our intel enterprise is a part of that. And I'll let them know that it's seen and appreciated. Thanks a lot for that.
You know, we are very lucky to have conversations like this all the time with leaders in the industry. But for folks that don't have that opportunity and want to get the information, I would just strongly recommend that you check out our dispatch site on Patreon, where we're continuously putting out information on the latest in the Intel community. And if you want to have conversations like the one we just were lucky enough to have with Andrew with other Intel professionals, please take a look at our Discord site, which is called Dispatch Central. All this can be found on our website at IXN Solutions. And with that, I'll push it back to you, Jeremy.
Hey, another great episode, Joe. So for our audience out there, if you have a topic you want the IXM team to cover, shoot it on over. If you want to be a guest, we can most certainly make that happen. And we'll end it like Ryan likes to end it every time. If you recognize an incident, recognize it first, react accordingly, and most certainly report it. Until next time, thanks for giving us a listen.